Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for you Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from Pro Football Network. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, the Vikings continue to be absolutely terrible in the third quarter. Is it time that we just either find some way of skipping forward in time, or can we just all do something else for 15 minutes?
just kind of go out, grab a beer, come back.
Lawn work, like it's the wrong time of year for it is the problem. Like,
so if you're the Vikings and you offer to skip the third quarter to your opponents, and in exchange your opponents just get 10 points, do you think that a random opponent would say no?
Boy, that's interesting. I think Detroit would say no because they would think that they could get more than 10 out of the third quarter.
Yeah, okay.
I think Belichick would absolutely do it, though.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, my God.
Yeah, Belichick would jump on that. I think Pete Carroll would think that it's a conspiracy. Mm-hmm. I think that Kingsbury would find some way of blaming it on Kyler or vice versa. And I'm pretty sure that the coach out of Denver, Hackett, I believe, would find some way of spilling hot gravy all over himself while trying to explain the answer.
Yeah, well, he would definitely say no and then give up 15 points.
Sure. Like, no. On the contrary, this is a trick. We will give you 15 points. Unreal. Well, welcome to this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys are all doing well. The Vikings beat the Jets.
Hooray.
Despite the fact that the Vikings were leading the entire game, not a thing that was very certain for a while there. There were questions. There were a lot of field goals. If you owned the kicker for in the Hell League, boy howdy, did you have a great day. But
yeah. Oh, did you check? Because it looked like that person might have lost, maybe?
Well, like a number of the Hell Leagues exist. A number of the Hell Leagues exist, and he had and this particular kicker got 126 points.
Yep.
I did see somebody get a combination of over 220 points.
Yeah, that's the one that I posted. 126 points from Zerline, and I think 98 points from
something like that. 94, I think. Yeah, just a ridiculous amount. It was glorious, and yes, I believe he lost. So because the Hell League makes fools of us all. Make sure to try to join this next year. I'm just going to keep opening up leagues until everyone who wants to be in hell is, and then I can just retire.
Yeah, there you go.
That's probably how this works. Well, welcome to this episode of Norse Code. Again, the Vikings beat the Jets. Great. We have a lot to talk about, as it turns out. The Vikings were successful against a very good defense and an offense that just couldn't get out of the red zone. It was wonderful. And also we have a fantastic mailbag that is going to go long. Do not feel bad about not making it to the end of this episode. We are trying to get all of the dumb stuff out, and we've got quite the backlog of terrible questions. And last episode, in case you missed it, I declared a moratorium on all magic and magic-related questions. And this was all going to end on Monday's show. So here we are. If you do not finish this episode, do not feel bad about it. This is going to go for a bit. So all of that aside, again, thank you guys so much for listening to Norse Code. If you enjoy the show and would like to donate to the show, if you'd like to financially support the show, you can do so in a couple of different ways. You can be like Glitchy Lauren and B Badger, who went over to patreon.com. In Lauren's case, she upgraded her membership, but you can go over to Patreon for $3.50 a month. You too can access things like the bonus episodes. You can access the Discord. Just a reminder that it is December now, and the Christmas episode will be coming out in December this year. Not
you say that.
Not in February. I was in a bad place last year. This year, we're doing it in December. We're going to make it work. It's happening in December this time. I've already started on it. So the Patreon people, it's worth mentioning, though, that the Patreon people get an extra Christmas episode or two, depending on how generous I am in the coming year. So this is what you have to look forward to over at patreon.com/NorseCode. You can also donate to the show over at paypal.me/NorseCode as well. Or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and get yourself a fine wreath, a throw pillow, Christmas mug. The Christmas socks are always a favorite. If you know somebody who enjoys the show, get them the Norse Code Christmas socks. They look amazing. They feel amazing, I've been told. Sure. Go for it. They are absolutely wonderful. Get yourself an Wreath ugly sweater or the ugly hoodie. Get it signed by us at a live show next time we have one over at norsecode.threadless.com. I think next live show, I'm just going to start throwing throw pillows out to the audience.
Oh my God.
I think that's the next step.
It doesn't have to be. You can prevent this from happening, James.
I don't really want to prevent it, though. I want to encourage people to go over and buy things like this in the shower curtain.
But if you give it to them, they're not going to buy it.
Well, it will cause people to see it, and then they will want to buy it. We're creating influencers here, right? Like this is that's awful. That's
wait. Are people going to put it in their cars and just have it like taped to the back so people can see it? Like
yes,
and no, it's going to be at home on their couch where no one's going to see it.
Are you saying that our listeners are antisocial and don't have people coming over?
They're listening to this podcast.
I think you are just a bit too negative, and that's coming from me. So if you'd like to donate, you can do so in a number of different ways there. Thank you guys so much. Let's get into the show itself and talk about what happened in the New York Jets game. Again, let's start at the top with what we discussed at the top. The third quarter appears to be the worst time to be a Vikings fan this year, outside of the last 30 seconds of each game.
The last 30 seconds. Yeah, I mean, the pattern that they follow, generally speaking, is to come out ahead in the first quarter. Usually, the opening drive. They've now scored on, technically, I guess, 8 of 10 opening drives or something like that, of their most recent opening drives. But the last one was like a field goal off of a turnover. Kind of weird way to do it. But if you take a look at, so they do well in the first quarter. Then in the second quarter, they stall a little bit. Third quarter, they are like catastrophically bad. And then in the fourth quarter, they become, I guess I can't say magical wizards anymore, right?
You can say it today. You just can't say it Thursday.
Like what?
No, we're done with magic stuff after this episode.
I thought it was after the last episode. Wait.
Nope, it's after this episode because we have enough stuff to go through. So, this is the last episode of it. Okay.
Well, the Vikings in the third quarter rank 31st in the NFL in third quarter point differential. They always collapse in the third quarter. There's rarely a distinction in how well they perform. And what's interesting is it is their best quarter by special teams points. Some of that has to do, or points expected. Some of it has to do with the Kenny Nwangu return. But for the most part, the Vikings are awful on defense and catastrophically bad on offense in the third quarter. And then in the fourth quarter, they're turned around. They've got a minus 52 point margin in the third quarter compared to minus 43 from the Chargers and minus 58 from the only other opponent that's worse than the Vikings in the third quarter, the Detroit Lions. Although I suspect if we just limited that to the last 5 games, things would look a little bit different for them.
What a weird... last year, it was the last 2 minutes of every half.
Mm-hmm.
The things just went horribly wrong. This time, we've extended it to 15 minutes.
Yes, but we've removed it from the end of halves. So apparently that's a win, I guess. Apparently that's what makes the Vikings good now, is to create a good 4 minutes at the expense of a bad 15. That sounds like a bad trade. But again, the Vikings are winning now. So I guess who's to say?
I realize this sounds like we're complaining the Vikings were able to win, but we're trying to figure out exactly why we have to suffer through these things. And
yeah, it's very stressful, especially because the Vikings didn't do it in the exact same way this time, right? Because the first quarter, aside from those 3 points on the opening drive, which you guys 3, not 7, we're used to seeing, was pretty poor. Cousins I don't think he completed any passes until like pass 8 or something like that. The first quarter was pretty bad. But the second quarter was fantastic. Third quarter was still awful. And the beginning of the fourth quarter also kind of sucked. It felt like it was going to be a different game. And then, of course, they pull it out.
He looked rattled. He looked like he took a couple of good shots there too, but he looked very rattled.
Yeah, the pressure numbers from PFF they don't seem correct to me. They have his pressure percentage somewhere around like 31 to 35 or something like that, something lower than 40, and that does not seem correct. But he did take 9 quarterback hits, at least by the box score, and that seems correct. That seems like that matches what I remember from the game, how often he was harassed, how often he was hit. He also took 2 sacks. It was pretty bad just in terms of the amount of abuse he took, and then also on a couple of runs, which don't get logged as quarterback hits. On a scramble, he took a huge shot. So, yeah, I mean, he took a ton of. And the thing about Cousins is that in this game, it's kind of a good kind of microcosm for the way the season has gone, which is to say, it is difficult not to acknowledge that, you know, a bunch of things kind of complicate our evaluation of him, right? And in this case, for the Jets, it's that there was an enormous amount of pressure, an enormous amount of hits, right? Justin Jefferson was dropping passes he typically doesn't drop, right? Sometimes receivers were not getting to the right route depth, right? Like those are things that are not necessarily his fault, that implicate his performance, but he wasn't as bad as his statistics say. His statistics say he was awful, right? But at the end, it's difficult not to just kind of give him credit for putting together such like a tough, gritty performance. Like it's one of those things where you're like, well, it's not like he played miraculously well, but you kind of have to respect it, you know? So it's kind of an interesting game to break down because it's really difficult to come away from that game having like a bad opinion of how things went with Kirk Cousins, right? But if you kind of break down what should be expected given the amount of pressure he had, given what the receivers were doing, you know, I would say that he had a below average game for him, right? And so it's a tough one to kind of, you know, break down. But, you know, again, like always, he had a bunch of really good moments. I don't know. Some of those moments are just like, you know, the super easy looking touchdown pass to Justin Jefferson or the insane pass to Jalen Reagor that may have been more Reagor than him. I felt like that was destined for the ground.
It looked to me. It looked like it did in fact look like an arm punt because he came back for it.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
He was fielding it. He wasn't catching it. He was fielding it.
Yeah, and so he fielded it a lot better than he fields punts. So glad it didn't completely fulfill that particular process. But yeah, it's just kind of a weird game. I mean, a lot of Vikings games are weird games, but this one's weird, I guess, for slightly different reasons in that it's tough to come away thinking that Kirk Cousins like deserves to be like blasted for how he played in that game, even though he didn't play all that well, just because of just how many hits he took and how much pain he clearly was in.
You know, the best part of that whole thing, though, was when he went for the run and he took out the defender. Like, he hurt the defender on that run.
Oh, yeah. You know what that reminds me of? That reminds me of Christian Ponder taking out Lance Briggs.
Boy, I haven't thought of that in years.
Yeah, it's just like, and Ponder was like more athletic than Cousins, but it's like wasn't really part of his game in any capacity. And so when it happened, you were just like, what? Why is this happening?
And you have to know that the training staff was making fun of Lance Briggs for weeks after that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. They had to have been.
Like,
if not the training staff, the rest of the Bears defense.
Well, yeah. Like, you're on. Are you going on IR because you got hit by Christian Ponder? Really?
It's like whenever like a kick returner gets taken down by the kicker.
Yeah, exactly.
Same thing. Same thing.
It's like when dude got decleated by McAfee.
Oh yeah,
Just
lit up too.
And I just remember. See, McAfee wasn't always like the wasn't always like the podcast voice, whatever. He was a legitimately good punter.
He's a really good punter. Yeah,
and like his social media at the time was mainly posting whenever he got steroid tests that would come in, and they always happened after he lit up a kicker or after he lit up a returner. You go, really, Lee?
Yeah.
This is my fourth one in 4 weeks.
He seemed like kind of a quirky dude, and now he is a legitimately entertaining character. Because I remember when he retired, I think, what did he announce it through Barstool or something? And then, yeah. And I was like, oh, this guy's pretty funny. It's too bad that it's Barstool and I'm never going to watch it. But, you know, it's pretty funny. And then he split from Barstool, and which at the time I thought was actually a bad business move for him. Because, I mean, it was hitting his target audience anyway. And so you just have to build up his own. But what a great move on his part. Like, his show is just fantastic.
There's been some success there. That's for damn sure. Yeah. All right, let's get back to the game. Obviously, Cousins took a number of hits, and Jefferson took a number of hits. But the matchup between Sauce Gardner and Justin Jefferson didn't really turn into much. And like on paper, it didn't look like Justin Jefferson was like accomplishing much, but he was still burning corners for the Jets.
Yeah, I mean the numbers don't look phenomenal for Jefferson, you know, overall. And a lot of that is Cousins. Some of that is, again, he had 2 drops, right? Like he gets open and he drops the ball. Well, obviously the cornerback didn't do a good job, right? Like obviously he got open and he did what he needed to do, except the final phase. So yeah, I mean, he did a pretty good job continuing to get open, but he didn't also match up against Sauce Gardner that often, which, I mean, is the correct move from the Vikings, right? It's like, would you rather have Justin Jefferson play against DJ Reed or Sauce Gardner? Well, DJ Reed, right? And that turned out to be correct. And Jefferson just needed to hold in the ball a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, he played largely, certainly well enough to get open, right? Again, I don't want to discount the impact of those drops, but he definitely played well enough to get open on a consistent basis against Reed, and Reed's been having a really good season. So,
and Justin Jefferson got to tweet some trash to him too. So
yeah, of course,
it's about time for a wide receiver tweet from him.
Yeah, no, exactly. We're on the path, right? Soon enough, we'll get to there's truth to all rumors, and then everyone's going to melt down.
Yes. What a ridiculous thing. So the passing game was there, and Rager had a great catch, and Thielen, who really tried to make something of that catch, and instead went backwards 5 yards trying to find it, but he really did try.
He did try. There's a lot of negative passing plays for the Vikings as well.
Yeah.
But he really did try.
He really did try out there. But Dalvin Cook looked good out there. Alexander Mattison ended up with a touchdown and did just enough gyrations for his dance not to get fined.
Yeah, exactly. 2.5 by Kevin Seifert's count, I think.
Famously, Kevin Seifert's count.
Yeah, no, it's important, right? Because 3, that's a fine. We all know it. But yeah, no, Cook did a pretty great job. I mean, he got contacted behind the line a lot. And so for him to kind of continue to, force missed tackles, generate some long gains, I think he had a 14-yarder and a 21-yarder on about like it was I think it was like 20 carries, but only like 15 of them look like, I don't know, legitimate is the wrong word, but look like carries where he could, make something of it. And he was pretty consistent in that regard. So that was pretty good to see. Like you said, Alexander Mattison just finding ways to score in the red zone. I think it reminded me of the screen pass that he got a couple of weeks ago for a touchdown. Like very, very similar in terms of his ability to just kind of make people miss, find open space, and get into the end zone. So a pretty decent game from the running backs. I think you add it all up. If you include the Rager run and the Cousins scrambles, and with Justin Jefferson in the first drive or the second drive had a run for about 11 yards or something like that.
Well, he did discover it was the first drive. He was they attempted to have him throw the pass.
Yeah, that was it. That was right. Yeah,
and then he showed more patience than Russell Wilson has shown all year, and ended up just running for it and had some success with it.
Yeah. So altogether, if that gets counted in the running game, which I guess if that does, so do the Cousins scrambles. Altogether, that's 4.7 yards per attempt. So not bad to have all of that together. Pretty good running game. And for the most part, I think that was primarily kind of the running backs. But, we'd been talking a little bit about how Blake Brandel had been playing, I think, better than you'd expect a backup left tackle to play. That when he was put in initially off the first Darisaw concussion, when he was put in, he actually did all right. Now, obviously, last week before the Jets game, he wasn't doing all that hot. He had a pretty bad game, but this one, he did a pretty good job. Not necessarily like he gave up on the stat sheet. He gave up, I think, both sacks, but I don't know that they were necessarily his fault. And I don't know that like the pressures he gave up were big products of his play. But what really stood out to me is that he seemed to me to be a little bit more of a pass protector in camp, but he actually showed up pretty big in the running game. And that was it was good to see, right? Because again, I didn't expect a ton out of him. But he was able to put, especially against a pass rush this potent, but he was able to put some stuff together to kind of help create a lot of those runs that we're talking about. I think Brian O'Neill had, I think, one of his better games of the season. We're still kind of waiting on, Ed Ingram to have a good game, but certainly this was one of his better ones. I don't think Bradbury was all that amazing, but he wasn't a huge liability. I thought Ezra Cleveland played pretty well. I think that he gave up a pretty significant hit pretty quickly. But other than that, I thought that he played pretty well. So I think that the offensive line against one of the deeper defensive lines we'll see had a respectable showing, not an amazing one, despite the fact that I just talked about how often Kirk was harassed, how many hits he took. Just because, like, I think that, Ingram and Bradbury having their problems contributed to that. But also, B, I think Cousins sometimes would hold on to the ball long enough, or there was an assignment to a tight end or to a running back that was blown. But the offensive line itself did all right, especially in the running game.
The offensive line was a bit surprising to me, considering just how good this defense is. Like, make no bones about it, this is one of the top defenses in the league. I would argue better than the Patriots defense, and it showed for a while. The offense was sputtering and couldn't get anything going. Luckily, the defense held up, but this was every bit the struggle that people were kind of expecting as far as the Vikings offense was concerned.
Yeah, no, for sure. It was like, the thing is, you take a look at that game, you see how many hits Cousins took, and you go back and you see kind of like how much of that is on the offensive line. And it turns out, a decent amount, right? Again, Bradbury and Ingram, but also like a lot of it just has to do with, the way the play was drawn up. A lot of it has to do with Cousins holding onto the ball just a tick too long. Some of it has to do with, you've got Johnny Mutton pass protection. You've got TJ Hawkinson in pass protection. Sometimes they're not holding up necessarily. Dalvin Cook, I think, gave up a hit. So, they're finding ways to get into the backfield, finding ways to do some damage. Quinnen Williams was able to, before his injury, which always sucks to see, he was able to do a pretty significant job in terms of, penetrating the pocket. But yeah, I think for the most part, we did see elements of how well that defense plays. And I think one way to think of it is that the Vikings were in fact playing for a good chunk of time 10 on 10. If I can check how many times Sauce Gardner was actually targeted, that might actually help out. But yeah, it was difficult for the Vikings to find space because they chose to condense the field by getting away from Gardner. Okay, so it looks like they targeted him about 4 times. Gardner gave up 17 yards. I believe one of them was a screen, so I don't know if I'd count that much. But they mostly ran away from him, and it wasn't until the DJ Reed injury that you felt like you could see kind of a crack open in the defense. Still, I think that, before that injury, they were still beginning to figure out, but you got these big plays, big hits from Jordan Whitehead. One of them turned out to be a penalty. If that's the one I remember, I don't think it should have been the one on Justin Jefferson. But you had, big plays from the slot corner, Michael Carter too. You had big plays from the two linebackers, Quincy Williams and CJ Mosley. But for the most part, the Vikings had to play condensed because they didn't want to challenge Sauce Gardner all that much. And that creates, these tighter windows. It creates these problems finding ways to generate space. If you're not going to throw to one side of the field, it's really difficult to run route combinations in a particular way. And because of that, the Vikings just didn't find space, even though they've got route runners like, Justin Jefferson, even though you're supposed to kind of like this TJ Hawkinson matchup against those linebackers. That defense showed up. They, for the most part, did pretty well blocking up against the run. Again, Dalvin Cook would force a missed tackle here or there. Alexander Mattison was able to get his touchdown. And so it's not as if the Jets were perfect against the run or anything like that. But a lot of that is kind of, this big play here, this big play here. For the most part, I think that the Jets defense, they didn't live up to the reputation. I mean, the Vikings still scored 27 points, but they still demonstrated, I think, a lot of what makes them a pretty intimidating defense to go up against.
Oh, absolutely. And let's talk about the Vikings defense for a moment. They didn't break. And in 4 straight trips, in 4 straight drives, they didn't allow a touchdown. They just allowed field goals. And it's really the story of why the Vikings were successful is because the defense was able to hold up just enough. And that seems to be a theme lately. It's the defense is doing just enough to keep it from being a blowout or keeping the Vikings from losing.
Yeah, that was really interesting to see, right? Because when teams take 6 trips into the red zone and come away with 1 touchdown, and that touchdown was pretty late, that's extremely rare. I mean, I guess we've seen the Vikings offense do it, so I guess it's not, so rare as to be kind of notable, but it is pretty rare, and you don't see very often. A team that's usually good enough to get there is usually good enough more often than not to score more than once, right? And so, here's a good example. The Bills are bottom half of the league in red zone offense, right? That they just simply do not produce that many touchdowns once they enter the red zone. Also, because they enter the red zone so often, and because they're big play teams, they're a top 3 offense by points scored. I think they might be number 1. I forget if that's still true by the end of this week. But, they score the most points. It's red zone offense and red zone defense just does not tend to tell us very much overall about the character of a defense. That's not always true. The Rams were pretty good at red zone defense for a while before Brandon Staley left. Famously, the Mike Zimmer defense has been really excellent in the red zone beyond its, capacity to give up yardage. And maybe that's the case here, right? But man, the Vikings, they held up, but they also got pretty lucky. I think, being able to stop all of those runs on first and goal, second and goal, third and goal, fourth and goal, all basically at the 1 yard line. It helps that if you're good at football, being able to stop the run. But the Vikings have been notoriously poor in short yardage situations. They've not been generally pretty good at that. Although I guess the last significant short yardage situation was the Josh Allen fumble in his own end zone. But they've not been great at defending the run, especially in these short yardage situations. And here they hold up really well. I think they got lucky that the Jets didn't call an actually effective play. They got lucky that they were playing Mike White. They got lucky that the way that they ran the ball was fairly predictable. But they also took advantage of the luck, right? And that's something that you kind of want to see. We can sit here and I will say that this sort of stuff is not sustainable. Sure, it's not. But that's different than they didn't do a good job in that situation. They did a great job in that situation. The worry is that they will have to keep on doing that kind of job again and again and again. And that's a little bit too much to expect of a defense. But here, 5 for 6 in forcing non-touchdown drives in the red zone. Really great stuff. They did benefit from that drop from Braxton Berrios in the end zone that would have won the Jets the game. So, it's not as if it was entirely their doing, but in the opportunities that they could show up, for the most part, they did.
And Mike White was everything that I'd say everything that they thought he was going to be, but like he showed up and had swagger. He played reasonably well against a set of corners that, boy, this cornerback group looks more and more like a MASH unit every game.
Yeah, I mean, we did get to see a Caleb Evans for a while. we didn't get to see all of it, right? We still had to see was it Duke Shelley come in for a little bit? For a little bit, I mean, he came in for like 30 plus snaps, I think. So a little bit is stretching it. But we saw Duke Shelley for a while. We saw Chandon Sullivan made some great plays. He also made some pretty bad plays. Notably, he was behind the missed tackle, but he also generated some really cool pass breakups, like some forced incompletions that were really important. The fact that, Duke Shelley and Caleb Evans are both getting like really significant snaps is an issue, right? But at least Caleb Evans can play well, and Duke Shelley, for the most part, kind of holds up. I think late in the game we saw, a pretty significant one that he gave up, but for the most part, he kind of holds up. And I think that's the most you can get out of, a practice squad guy, especially the guy that's not even on your own practice squad, but that you grab from another one. And then even Patrick Peterson, who I think his numbers look good, right? Because I think he gave up like 14 yards, but he also benefited from an enormous receiver. I don't know if it's a receiver drop or it's both, right? The quarterback threw it too far ahead of him, but the receiver could have held on to it. And I think it was Garrett Wilson. So, he's got he's developing a reputation to, make some of these difficult catches. He just didn't that time, right? But he was wide open. I think it was Garrett Wilson, but he was like wide open, right? And it kind of reminds me of the Christian Watson drop, right? In that instance, in week one, that was almost entirely on the receiver. Here, you've got kind of a mix of responsibilities, but for the most part, Peterson got burned, right? Sullivan found ways to make mistakes. He got burned a little bit too. Duke Shelley, gave up a big play. Caleb Evans gave up, a pretty big play. I think that they targeted him a ton because, why wouldn't you, right? You've got Patrick Peterson on one side, you've got a 4th round rookie on the other side. But I think a lot of that came on like a giant, I want to say 60-yarder. But yeah, I mean, he had his moments, but for the most part, it's a pretty good reminder that you basically would want a healthy cornerback group. Harrison Smith played really well, and Cam Bynum had like the game of his life, right? Because, he ends the game with a pick, but he also caused the Harrison Smith pick. Really great stuff. But the corners, that's an issue.
And Harrison Smith almost had a second pick too, which would have also been great.
That's right.
I do wonder how Patrick Peterson felt getting the ball lateral to him. Like, what are you doing exactly here? I don't. You realize I'm not fast this year at all.
Yeah, I'm the one guy here older than you.
Fun stat: Harrison Smith now has the most interceptions of any current NFL player. That's pretty cool. That is active. That's a fun stat. So, so who's hurt this week, as far as the corners? Because I believe there has to be at least one that's hurt now.
I think. Well, it kind of depends on what Cameron Dancer is going to look like. But right now, I think if we treat Cameron Dancer as hurt, we take the in-game injury for Caleb Evans. Then you've got both of them are hurt. Feel like I'm missing like one more, right? Like let me take a quick look at our lads, see what they have to say about the bright red names in our lads. Tell us who's hurt. It's just on IR. Never mind. So you got Cameron Dancer, Andrew Booth. That's the one. I'm sure a bunch of people were screaming at me. Andrew Booth, the 2nd round rookie, also hurt. Caleb Evans also potentially hurt. We'll see about how that goes long run. But yeah, it's the Duke Shelley show at this point. the two things I want to say about Duke Shelley is that this dude has absolutely earned his spot on the roster. And also, I never want to see him start again. I think both of those things can be true.
We can absolutely live in that universe.
Yeah.
He's getting reps. He's doing work. And,
it's not like, given the level of expectation and what preparation he's had going into these games and his familiarity with the defense and honestly also his contract, like, he is outperforming all of that. But, he's not playing like a second round corner, right? Like, you kind of want that guy out there.
Well, I'm glad he's at least not a gigantic liability at the moment.
He's no Benny Sapp.
Well, yes, that he is making plays out there. The defense doesn't seem to be getting very much in the way of pressures.
I think a lot of that has to do with the cornerback play. I think a lot of it just has to do with the fact that the quarterback can get rid of the ball before pressure arrives, which is not to say that we're getting a ton of pressure up the middle or anything like that. But I think Danielle Hunter had a pretty good game. I thought Za'Darius Smith had a pretty good game. But there's a difference between being able to like win at the line of scrimmage and being able to turn that into a pressure. And some of that just has to do with how the play operates. Patrick Jones had a great game. That was nice to see. He had like 11 pass rushing snaps. He made the most of it. I think he got, in addition to the sack, I think he got like a huge tackle for loss. I think that he got another quarterback hit. Jones had a pretty good game. Dalvin Tomlinson had a really good game, but they can't always translate into pressure just because, if you can get rid of the ball quickly, if you can, target Jordan Hicks in coverage and get, a quick 5-yard out, if you can victimize Duke Shelley or whatever, you'll do that before the pressure arrives. And so I think that the defensive line is actually doing a pretty decent job now of getting pressure. Danielle Hunter's playing better than he did at the beginning of the year, but it is not turning into a way to impact the quarterback, because before they have to move in the pocket or change the way they throw or account for some way for the fact that, this giant 260-pound person's about to crush them. If that's not part of the equation and they could just get rid of the ball, they will. And that doesn't mean that giant 260-pound person is playing poorly. They're playing pretty well, but they're not getting pressure. And I think that's because, there's just space underneath for a lot of these receivers.
Well, Greg Joseph didn't miss. That was impressive. We're pretty pleased about that. It's worth noting that despite the stat that we found last week about how the Vikings have won every game that he's missed in.
It's true. Yeah. I mean, the Vikings can win in games where he doesn't miss.
Yes.
They just definitely win games that he does miss.
What an odd quirk that will absolutely bite us later in the year.
100%. Not even close. Absolutely will do that.
Well, what do we need to say to wrap this conversation up? Because this is another game where the Vikings made it until the end, and you were rewarded for sticking around if you watched, both with a higher blood pressure and with watching the interception. I don't know. I sat and watched this and I wasn't fazed because I've seen this before, and it sucks to be the person who has the optimism shotgun, who has spent the last 2 years talking about how the Vikings are not to be trusted, to like just sit and look at my phone and be like, oh, it doesn't matter. Vikings are probably going to get a pick here, and then they
Feels
do.
Weird. Feels weird.
This is not right. Nothing is right about what's happening here. The Vikings are having moments where you can trust them, and I am not comfortable with this.
Okay, so in order to kind of assuage your feelings on this, your complicated feelings on this, if we assume that Aaron Rodgers is not a good quarterback, which I think is a safe assumption, right?
Boy, I think you know what? This is going to be a very, very hard thing for me to admit. I don't think he's a good quarterback this year.
Yeah, I know it was tough. I'm glad you were able to get that out.
God, I feel so much better.
The Vikings have played 3 good quarterbacks this year. It's Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, Dak Prescott. Now, Jalen Hurts and Dak Prescott absolutely lit them up, just mopped the floor with them. Josh Allen less so, right? They were able to make Josh Allen look bad that day. But otherwise, it's been Aaron Rodgers, Jared Goff, Andy Dalton, bad Justin Fields, Skylar Thompson, Kyler Murray, Taylor Heineke, Mac Jones, and Mike White, which is, Mac Jones, but different.
I swore you were going to say, but whiter, and I wasn't entirely sure how to take that.
It was on the tip I was thinking about.
It was right there. It was absolutely right there.
But yeah, and it's like, okay, so they've not played a good quarterback. There's a really good opportunity that they'll play a good quarterback in the playoffs. Does Tom Brady count? I mean, we just saw what Tom Brady did, but like, you can't play 3.5 quarters of bad quarterback and call that good just because of the final quarter, right? Like, you can't.
I don't know. People are doing that about Kirk Cousins.
He has a good first quarter. It's not the
suppose
same.
He has one more quarter of being decent. My bad.
Yeah. See, it's an important distinction. But yeah, you go into the playoffs, you're playing a good quarterback. Like, apparently I'm going to finish the sentence with Geno Smith. I think you're in a tough spot. I think it's difficult for you to like translate the performance against Skylar Thompson, or I guess more realistically in that case, Teddy Bridgewater. Translate that performance into, being able to definitely take down, Geno Smith, who's playing, excellent football or whatever right now, right? Like, that's it's difficult to think that that's going to be the possibility, right? So that's one way to kind of put away the optimism and ward off the optimism shotgun as a result. I think also just like, sick of it's the wrong word. I'm tired of waiting for the other shoe to drop, but that doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. It's just going to happen at a moment that it means more, right? Like, we've got a question coming in from somebody about, the Vikings having like games left to play that actually mean something, which we'll talk about in a second. But it happening in one of these games is not going to deflate you. It happening in the playoffs is what's going to deflate you. So we'll just have to kind of defer on late game collapses until the games matter again. Weird thing to say.
Yeah, very.
How do Packers bloggers cover like a 13-3 team? And like, they're like week 15 and they talk about the stakes of this game that doesn't matter. How do they do this, man? It's crazy.
I don't know. I mean, you could talk to one of the owners, but he sounds like he's got his own problems right now.
I had a brief discussion with the Packers owner, working through some stuff right now. For unrelated reasons, furiously researching what went on in the Nuremberg trials. That's just how down bad that person is.
I don't have a good response to that, so instead we're going to move to the mailbag. Damian Barrett kind of branches off this discussion. Has this team become untrustworthy in its penchant not to be trusted?
I mean, can you imagine a more Vikings thing? Yeah. Like, the thing is about a lot of these Vikings teams, not all of them, right? I think Case Keenum is an exception to the rule I'm about to say, is that you generally didn't have like a rational reason to distrust the most exciting teams, right? Like, yeah, you can say there are some reasons, right? Like, so for the Brett Favre 2009 season, it's like, well, I've seen Brett Favre, right? Like, I know that he'll throw game-breaking interceptions, but this year he's not doing that. And we've got this rookie, Percy Harvin, that seems to be able to do a lot with the ball in his hands. We've got Sidney Rice that catches every pass thrown his way. We've got Asante Shenko that's just always going to be available to catch the ball. Like, I don't know. This seems like a pretty good team. And he's only thrown 7 picks all this year. And, it's not because of like dropped picks. So like, you had to like rely on your sense of the Vikings are going to let me down, and rely on your sense of like, well, historically Brett Favre has had these problems, but like not point to anything in season and say, there's no way that this can continue, right? With the 2017 Vikings, you could say that, but like, you go back to like the 41 Donut team, you go back to like all of these teams that were really fun to watch, and you didn't have a reason. There was something kind of extra in the essence there. And I think here the Vikings, who have that reason, are trying to put it to bed. Like, in terms of doing the most to hurt their fans, they need to make sure that like skepticism of what they can do is dead and buried before they punch you in the mouth, right? Like, because every time they do this, it gets easier and easier to put your guard up. And so they have to work harder and harder to lull you into that false sense of security. So I think that's what's happening here.
It's very possible. Also from Damian Barrett, the defensive coordinator talk last week got me thinking, has a head coach ever rejoined a team they had led as a coordinator? And if Zimmer were to come back as a defensive coordinator, would it be more of a help or a distraction?
So the instant answer that popped off the top of my head, I didn't do very much research on this question because technically I only need to answer it once. But the instant answer that popped up in my head was Gary Kubiak, because he was like an advisor after he was a head coach for the Denver Broncos, but that doesn't count. And so the first one that came to my head that counted was Wade Phillips, who was the defensive coordinator for the Denver Broncos in like 98 or something? I totally forget now. And then was their head coach for a brief period of time. And, like he always does, he got fired from being a head coach, bounced around the league for a little bit, became the defensive coordinator for the Buffalo Bills, then the head coach, defensive coordinator for the Falcons, then the head coach, defensive coordinator for the Chargers, then the head coach of the Cowboys, defensive coordinator for the Texans, then the head coach of the Texans. But then in 2015, in 2015, he became the defensive coordinator for the Denver Broncos. So that counts. He was the defensive coordinator, then head coach, then defensive coordinator. Also, it's not 98 because that was Elway season. It was 93.
Ridiculous. Here, people are expecting you to be perfect.
Are they?
No, God, no. Brian.
Yeah, so we have one answer, which means that I've successfully answered this question. Yes, it has happened at least once.
Brian asks, we as fans seem to talk a lot about Kirk's shortcomings and surprising moments during key stretches in games. I think the general consensus has been, we'll take it. But what is your take on how Kevin O'Connell feels about Kirk's season? Is the winning curing all ails? Or is he more frustrated that Kirk continues to struggle in an offense that seems to be setting him up for success? Also, it seems we need to run tight end screens to Johnny Munt, since those are the only ones that seem to have worked all year.
I would not bet on that, on that last one. I do not think the Johnny Munt screen is going to produce fruitful results going forward.
It's not going to save us all?
No, it's the Munt screen is not the solution to what ails them. No, in terms of like how KOC feels about it, my sense, and I haven't been for the past couple of weeks in the Vikings building or in the locker room, so I haven't had the press conversations or the off the record conversations with O'Connell that I might have had with Vikings personnel last year, right? So I don't get as good of a view, but my sense is that O'Connell is very aware of the underperformance of the offense throughout most of the game. He is aware of Kirk Cousins' role in that, but he also seems to genuinely be of the mind that Kirk Cousins is a little too harsh in that respect. I think that he wants to recognize what Cousins is doing well, but also recognize that there is a lot of room for improvement because we've seen Cousins play better. That is my sense. Is it also my opinion? Yeah, it's close enough to my opinion that maybe I'm projecting a little bit. But I do genuinely think that O'Connell, based off of what he said in pressers, seems to understand that the Vikings cannot be a consistent team playing this kind of football, and part of that has to do with what the offense is doing.
Let's go to Paul, who asks, given Lewis's injury and Bynum's ascension, is it safe to say that Kwesi should have traded the farm to move up and take Sauce Gardner? Most of his first draft class is looking pretty suspect. Meanwhile, O'Connell and Kwesi continue to benefit from the last few gifts from Spielman.
Okay, well, think about those last few gifts, right? Like Justin Jefferson aside, somebody like Cam Bynum or KJ Osborne or Kenny Wangu, those are all, even I guess a little bit Justin Jefferson, those are all players that did not contribute right away, right? Like those are players that had to work to get onto the field. They did not start week one. They were injured, right? Some of them. I would not like take a look at Andrew Booth's like initial injury and say like, hey, this is a good sign that this draft class is buzzed. I even, as like a big critic of the Ed Ingram pick for a lot of reasons, a lot of them on field, right? I would not say that, this rookie season is proof that my on-field assessment of him was correct. It suggests it, right? Just like a bad rookie year for a quarterback suggests that, it wasn't a great pick, right? But it doesn't prove it, right? Josh Allen obviously is the prototypical example. We didn't see anything from Patrick Mahomes year one. We didn't see anything from Aaron Rodgers year one. Daniel Jones is looking okay, I guess, somehow. That didn't happen years 1, 2, or 3. A lot of these quarterbacks, Tua Tagovailoa right now, is like the most efficient quarterback. Jalen Hurts is potentially the MVP. None of them look good year one. I wouldn't say that this is like a really good example of that, right? We don't know. Like Lewis Cine, if I'm going to be completely honest, was not playing very well in camp, right? It's hard to evaluate safeties in camp, so I don't want to be definitive. If we add in the preseason, we add in some of the scrimmage against the 49ers, it was fair to say that there were some concerns, not like long-term concerns, but it just seemed like he wasn't picking up the defense as quickly as he should have, especially given his reputation for being such an intelligent player at Georgia. So that does not mean that in year 2 that things are not going to click for him. So I wouldn't say that. Would it be nice to have Sauce Gardner? Yes. Would it be better to have, instead of a great corner like Sauce Gardner, if, say, Andrew Booth turns out to be good, if, say, Lewis Cine turns out to be good, if Ed Ingram turns out to be serviceable, is it better to have a good corner, a good safety, and a serviceable guard, or is it better to have a great corner? And I think for the Vikings, it's better to have that first option, right? Good corner, a good safety, and an okay guard. So I don't know about that. Like if you said that like the Justin Jefferson pick, wasn't great because he didn't get onto the field very much in his first 2 games, or if you said that Kenny Nwangwu, that pick, wasn't good because he couldn't play the first 9 games or whatever, right? You probably would have ended up wrong, right? It's tough to say right away, what to do. Like we do have some certainty here, right? That Sauce is probably going to turn into an insanely good player. He's probably going to be a consistent Pro Bowler. We can't say that for sure. We've seen a lot of rookies flame out, right? But he's, probably going to be an extremely good player, whereas we can't say probably anything about Cine or Booth, but we could probably say something about Ed Ingram. It suggests that he's not going to be good. So, that I think plays into it. But for the most part, I don't really think so. I don't think that this is evidence that they should have traded everything to move up and take Sauce Gardner. And, if we're going to play the hindsight game, why did they take a Caleb Evans and not Tariq Woolen? Why did they take Andrew Booth and not Kobe Bryant? I actually don't know which ones were taken first or second between all of those, but they could have taken both of those players without moving around too much in the draft, and they didn't, right? So that maybe that's a better one, right? They're both playing better for the Seahawks than Booth is for the Vikings. They're both healthy, right? So you could do that, but for the most part, I wouldn't say that we can say that Kwesi should have traded up or anything like that.
Let's go to our next question, and that's going to be from Sean, who asks, we could be left with a very quirky situation of the Vikings having 3 games left to play and essentially nothing to play for. Further to this, the way these games are scheduled leaves plenty of opportunity for players not to be fully focused. A home game on Christmas Eve versus the Giants, a road game at freezing Lambeau on New Year's Day, and a road game at a freezing Soldier Field that'll almost certainly mean 0. If this was Zimmer, he'd say get out and play. However, I'd like to think that Kevin O'Connell is a little bit more pragmatic in the scenario. I'm having a hard time deciding whether or not having 2 to 3 weeks of meaningless games is a good thing, resting starters, trying things pre-playoffs, or a bad thing, loss of momentum. What are Arif's thoughts?
I think that so they should be very quick to move into backup mode, right? They should be very quick into playing their backups in these games, but they should 100% play their starters. It's just when it's tough because the Vikings have only been playing in close games. So like, when are you going to say when the game's in hand, right? But whenever you get an opportunity, rotate those guys out, right? Like you want to preserve, especially a player like Zadarius Smith, you want to preserve those players for the playoffs. And so they should absolutely be really aggressive about rotating players in, seeing if you can get, Nick Mullins some time, seeing if you can get, Jalen Reagor on the field some more, seeing if you can get Josh Metellus and Brian Asamoah on the field a lot more, which already happened this week, right? You should rotate in players a little bit more often, but the team like isn't good yet. I mean, that was just the discussion we just had. The team isn't good yet, right? It's not so good that you don't want to put in some more reps that are going to be really important for them to be able to build on by the time they get to the playoffs. I know that there is some anecdotal evidence that suggests that teams that rest their starters in the final week of the season underperform by the first time they play. Those teams typically have the bye, so they've got like another week of rest, which complicates it, but tend to underperform in the playoffs. But it's difficult to disaggregate that from like Peyton Manning just kind of underperforms in the playoffs, right? So you take out the Peyton Manning data point, and you've taken out a lot of data for the teams that rest. So it is kind of difficult. I don't know if anyone's actually done a systematic view on that, which would help us inform on this question. But I would think that you want to play to some degree, right? The problem is at any point, if the Vikings sustain an injury, that's the point in the game where you could have said, well, one play earlier, they should have just started resting their starters. What are they doing, right? So that's kind of the difficult thing. But I think that the offense absolutely needs to get in sync, have that timing figured out. If this offense was if it was like, the way the Eagles are playing right now, or even the Cowboys, right? Like if you're at that point where, man, things are chugging on all cylinders offensively and defensively, right? Well, I guess the Eagles have some stuff to work out on defense, but things are basically just moving for you, right? Then yeah, you can say, hey, play him for the first 2 quarters, see if it feels the need to play in the third quarter, but throw in like Cooper Rush, hey, we just signed Odell Beckham or whatever. Let's, which hasn't happened yet as of this recording, but let's say they did, right? Let's throw him out there and make sure he gets an understanding what's happening with the offense. Hey, these backup offensive linemen haven't had a ton of reps. Let's get them in there just in case there's an injury and they need to communicate. So, I would say that if you're at a spot where you're like really comfortable with how in sync your offense and defense are, yeah, go for it, right? Like, there's no reason Micah Parsons has to keep playing through injuries, right? There's no reason Zadarius Smith has to keep playing through injuries. But I don't think that you're at the point where you can feel confident in where they're at to ignore getting reps in, because it's really hard to do that in an NFL practice schedule without the actual game to play.
Yeah, typically teams that make a Super Bowl run are taking care of things in December. So it would be nice to just say, oh, well, these games will just be taken care of. They'll be handled fairly easily, with the exception of maybe the Giants. That team's a little bit more frisky than it has any right to be. But, maybe we end up getting into that sort of point. But it's too early to tell at the moment. And quite frankly, no game has been easy this year, with the possible exception of week 1 against the Packers.
Week 1 game, yeah, of all things.
Great. I'm glad we found out that the Packers are terrible before everybody else did. Wonderful. Drunken Vike asks, as a fan of process-oriented thinking, I've been warning those around me that the way the Vikings keep winning is unsustainable and unlikely to repeat in the future, but I continue to look increasingly silly. At what point do we admit math is broken and chaos is won?
Well, that is definitely results-oriented thinking. I question your commitment as a fan of process-oriented thinking. It seems like you're not part of the fandom. It seems like you can't even name process-oriented thinking's top 3 albums. That's crazy.
Wow, that went deep.
Just because the results aren't there? Come on, man.
That that surprised me a little bit. All right.
But yeah, I mean, I've seen teams go on 13-3 runs with bad process and then get bounced in the playoffs.
Speaking of Green Bay teams, yeah.
Yeah, just to pick an example of a random record that happens to align with a team that we talk about on occasion.
Yeah, funny how that works. That's ridiculous. All right, let's go to Ingram's left foot, who asks, is deferring to the second half a uniquely bad idea for this year's Vikings? They've been awful in the third, and it seems like opposing teams should want to force the Vikings to take the first possession out of halftime for some momentum.
It's less about hashtag momentum. It's less about reducing the number of possessions in the third quarter when you're bad, and more about increasing the number of possessions in the first quarter when you're good. So it's not a bad idea, or what you're functionally proposing is not a bad idea, right? That the Vikings should just take the ball. But for kind of not exactly quite the reason that you're talking about. One reason I really dislike the discussion about deferring is because it's the math isn't mathing. It doesn't actually make sense the way that it's constructed. The whole point is that you get, 2 possessions in a row, which you typically would never get in a football game without a quick turnover, right? And so you build up an additional, tempo, right? It like in chess, for example, black starts out half a move behind, essentially, I think is how they put it. And so they're always playing catch up. And so if white makes a meaningless move, black then gains tempo. And so they can be half a move or a full move ahead or something like that. Again, I don't play enough chess, or I haven't played chess in a long enough time to fully get what the terminology is, but that's close enough, right? And so the way that teams seem to be thinking about this is that they can gain tempo. They can gain that move by double dipping in possessions. But the problem is, in order to have a chance at double dipping, in order to have an opportunity, some percentage likelihood of that, they have to definitely give up the first move, right? It actually doesn't make sense to me that you have to lose a possession in order to gain a possession, but that possession means more because it occurs back to back. No, you're just making up for the possession you just lost. That's all it means. So I don't know. That one's just a weird discussion in general, and I think that it's a coin flip. There's a reason that it kind of doesn't matter, but to the extent that it matters, it should always be kind of contextual to the kind of team that you have. When the Vikings were a run dominant team with a good defense, which basically most of the time I've been covering them, I've always been of the opinion that they should actually receive the ball first because it allows them to get into the running game a little bit sooner. Because if they're a good enough team to come out ahead and they come out ahead early, it allows them to do the ball control stuff and drain the clock earlier. Whereas if they're a passing team, maybe that's a little bit less true. Because being forced to pass the ball is not necessarily the world's worst thing. So other factors might be able to play a bigger role, being able to choose the direction you're going because of the wind or something, right? So I never got it, but in this case where the Vikings are really bad in the third quarter and really good in the first quarter, you can maximize your being good on both offense and defense by just having the ball, because being good on defense doesn't often mean being able to gain points, except on the rare occasion that there's a turnover. Being good on offense means the ability to generate points. So I do think that you want possession when you're good and defer the possession when you're not good, even though possession prevents them from having the ball. Because if you're bad at offense in the third quarter, you're going to be punting it to them anyway on a 3-and-out. So I would prefer to maximize my advantage. I don't think this minimizes disadvantage. I think it just maximizes advantage.
Next question is from GLA90, who asks, how should one lower their heart rate after a Vikings game?
Melatonin.
All right. William asks, when is the banner raising ceremony recognizing the Vikings AFC East championship?
4-0, baby.
That is impressive. I imagine it'll look just as impressive as the one that hangs in Lucas Oil Stadium.
And when I took a picture of that and tweeted it out, like a bunch of Colts fans got mad at me, like for like tweeting it out.
Why?
Like,
This is their team embarrassment. Why are you the one that sucks?
well, it's like this like copium thing, right? Where they're just like, that's not weird to put that up. That's totally normal. And it's like, is it? Because I haven't been in the Viking Stadium a lot. They don't do that.
No, it's absolutely not. It's like the family that it's a bit like looking at remember the video that came out, the documentary of Tom Brady with his kids? And like he was like the extended kiss, like the extended kisses that were happening, like
yeah.
it's like that's not something a lot of people do. Like, no, it's totally normal. Like, no, it's not. But we can't stop you from doing that. But you should know that's not something other people do in the privacy of their own $1 billion stadiums.
Yeah. Like it's so weird. Just like admit that this is like weird and embarrassing, and then just like move on. Like someone called me like a Colts hater, and it's like, I don't care about the Colts. Like, okay, fine, whatever. This just take the L and move on. No one cares. You've got some actual banners. You're fine.
Yeah.
Very weird that they put that one up.
Like it would be funnier if they had 0 banners. Like if they had no championships, oh my god, would that be hilarious?
Yeah, because it'd be like pathetic, right?
Yes. However, you have real ones. Take down your little participation trophy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Your protest to Tom Brady. Jack Rackham asks, is this unsustainability sustainable? Recent history seems to suggest yes.
That's not how it works. You can't. Recent history suggests that this long-term trend is no longer true.
Yep.
Hey, man, this global warming thing can't be real. It's cold outside right now.
Well, it's the idea that you can't use solar energy when the clouds are out.
Hey, man, it's been cloudy the past couple of days. I don't know if this solar panel thing's going to work out for us.
Yeah. Beef Brewski asks, for a Reef's vibe check, now that we'll soon face a moratorium on questions related to the paranormal and the old religion, how are your vibes, Arif?
The old religion. My vibes were good, and then you asked this question.
Yeah, well, you told him to stay away, and he hasn't. Ed Donatello asks, for a Reeves Culinary Corner, I had birria tacos for the first time ever this weekend and was thoroughly underwhelmed. They were good tacos, but they weren't any better than regular tacos, and it just felt like a lot of extra steps for no reason. Care to comment?
So one, the fact that you spelled birria like Barilla, the pasta, suggests to me that you didn't actually go to a place that serves them authentically. But second, that's nuts. That's crazy. I can't believe you said that. That definitely didn't happen. You just made that up to make me angry. And guess what? It worked. The next time I trust a meme Twitter account that has the defensive coordinator with a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles mask as their profile picture, that'll be the first time, right? Come on. Absolutely not. Birria tacos are phenomenal. Did you even dip it into the consomme? I'm guessing you didn't. Because that immediately tells you it's a completely different class of taco. That's the official food of the Norse Code podcast, by the way. I've decided just now without consultation.
I'm actually fine with this.
Yeah, they're so good.
I watched a video today on YouTube of a fellow who made birria tacos with iguana meat. And
hold on. Was that the
it was Guga Foods that did that.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
And that's
2 iguana meat videos I saw this week. The other one was from History Channel Sola Awali. Yeah.
Boy, that's a very odd thing to be able to say that you did twice this week, but here we are. But the birria saved that, so why can't it, save your terrible taco? John Wilson Bennett has asked this a number of times. For Arif's friendship corner, Arif, do you want to hang out?
Okay, if you'd asked this like once, I'd say, yeah, man, I'm game. But you asked it not only multiple times, you asked it on other podcasts. You submitted it to and I know this because you tagged me. You submitted it to the Matthew Call of the Purple Insider podcast and the He Who Must Not Be Named Daily podcast of whoever that is.
He's been sick.
Come on. Oh, yeah. Yeah, good. I'm glad.
Are you cheering on? Are you cheering on a virus?
Yeah, well, sometimes you take the side of the human and sometimes you take the side of the virus.
Is this the enemy of my friend? Fine. By the way, whatever happened to the fellow that you had to bet with for the Vikings over?
So I actually know that person. So it's going to be pretty easy to arrange that. But I think we just hit the over, right? Because it's 10 yep. wins. He has not reached out to me yet. I do get to pick the place for lunch. And, in good spirits, I'll pick a good place to eat. But we haven't nailed that down yet. But not only does he obviously know my Twitter, he has my number, so he can just text me. But I'll take a picture and I'll post it right next to the tweet of me agreeing to get lunch if the Vikings hit the over.
At some point, somebody's going to pay for that framed tweet, and it's not going to be me this time. Ted Glover asks,
I do have a regret about the framed tweet.
Oh, you have a regret? I didn't know you were allowed to have those.
Well, the process was fantastic. I clearly was correct 99% of the way, which in most counties is just correct. But the 1% is that I took the light mode version of it and made it the picture because it's like the classic Twitter, and I just kind of wanted to make it look as much like a tweet as possible. But it my lighting setup is, I'm an amateur, right? I don't know how to do lighting very well. My lighting setup is such that it either gets blown out and you can't see it, or it's just not going to be contrasty enough. And so you can't really see the letters on the tweet in the occasions that I do actually have video going on. Also, it's a problem, the fact that I've got a normal, a webcam from Logitech as opposed to a real camera. But I'm not going to spend a couple $1,000s to get a real camera just so you can see the tweet better.
I disagree. I feel like that's what the Patreon money is for.
Yeah, we don't do video podcasts, but we're going to spend the money for video.
Exactly. Just in case we could.
Yeah.
So sign up over at patreon.com/NorseCode, get yourself an extra Christmas episode, and help Arif look better on TV.
Yeah, that's fair. And I'll wear better shirts, I promise.
That's a damn lie, and you know it. Ted Glover asks, is Arif enjoying his role as an entire NFL crap talker with Pro Football Network, or does he miss being able to just focus his talking on the Vikings and Seahawks? And what did he do to ensure a smooth transition?
So Ted knows this really well. I am just a hater at heart. That is what sustains me and moves me, and in many ways feeds me. It was pretty easy. I gotta say, it was pretty easy to move on from dunking on the Vikings and their decision making to being able to pick whatever team I wanted to and dunking on them and the decisions they make. One risk is, when you dunk on a team and you don't know the full context for why they made a decision, somebody will come in and correct you and say, hey, actually it makes sense for this reason, or hey, you interpreted this wrong, or hey, this thing is out of context. And that's a risk, and I gotta say, has not happened to me yet. So the transition is super smooth.
That's funny. The Logic Dump asks, if you were forced to swap one offensive player and one defensive player into each other's roles, except with the limitation they can't be, quote, functionally adjacent, example, no offensive defensive line swap, no wide receiver cornerback swap, who would they be? Following up, what is the most inappropriate swap you can think of?
Well, Kirk Cousins at cornerback is the most, I would trust Brian O'Neill or Ed Ingram at cornerback probably more. Um, but if I could, like, what Ed Ingram does not have the most amazing footwork. I guess we do know that.
Famously, his left foot. Yeah.
Yeah, right. But if I could choose non-adjacent swaps, so here is the issue: is that the adjacency thing is because I could see T.J. Hawkinson as a pretty good linebacker, but that does seem adjacent, right? Then maybe I put him at like pass rusher, right? Like the edge rusher position. That also kind of seems adjacent because the tight end body type typically maps on best to defensive end, right? Like a lot of times when you see a tight end had just switched from the defense or a defensive end had just switched from the offense, it's because they had played tight end, because those are both positions that demand a lot from you height wise. So it's difficult to figure out what adjacency is in that situation. But I do think that probably Hawkinson at edge rusher, not that he has an enormous amount of bend or the kind of burst that pass rushers have, but I think that one makes sense because it's not like, fullback and linebacker also seems adjacent. So I wouldn't want to put like it feels like violating the rules to put CJ Hammond at linebacker. I could see Dalvin Cook at safety. That actually doesn't seem like a bad fit, honestly. So I think that makes sense. On the other side of those, so I think Dalvin Cook at safety is probably your best bet. I think that's better than Hawkinson at edge rusher. On the other side of the ball, Danielle Hunter could play any position. He could play quarterback and I'd be intrigued, right? I'd be like, well, let's see how this goes. So there's that, but I would put him at tight end, right? But if we say that we cannot, do anything from an adjacency standpoint, I would then put him, like a Darren Waller type receiver before Darren Waller transitioned to tight end, or even I would like to see what he could do at running back. It would be comical seeing someone that large play running back, but we do see Derrick Henry do it every week, so it is something that is possible. But I think that tight end would be his best position. If we wanted to avoid that, Eric Kendricks could play running back. If we wanted to avoid that for adjacency reasons, a young Patrick Peterson would be a great running back. He would be a phenomenal running back. But if we're going to choose current age, Harrison Smith at tight end would make sense. So I don't know what your definitions of like functionally adjacent are, but I think I chose a good spread of players that at least each player on each side of the ball would fit that criteria.
And I just look forward to the idea of Greg Joseph playing safety.
It's not offense or defense. You can't.
Well, no, it said what's the most inappropriate swap you can think of too. So,
yeah, I thought it was just like offensive player and okay, fine. You're
gonna let me enjoy Greg Joseph attempting to put the hit on somebody?
Yeah, why not?
Mayo Coffee, which there's a terrible bit of awfulness, asks, for a Reef spice rack, where does cardamom rank in the pantheon of spices? Is cardamom better for sweet or savory dishes?
So do you know where Mayo Coffee comes from, the name?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Non-zero chance that the quarterback that spurred this whole thing on ends up in a Vikings uniform. It is possible.
I love it. It's the bits are strong, especially with Case Cookus.
The bits are so strong. Rams quarterback Case Cookus, who could basically start next week. I mean, they keep on hurting their players, so it's entirely possible. But cardamom. So cardamom does do really well in like a dessert application or a cocktail application. It really pops, but I think it's because it's traditionally a savory spice that happens to work well. I still think it is better in savory applications than sweet applications. It's just there's some moments where in sweet applications it's great. Like I've had a pink peppercorn creme brulee. It was out of this world. But that doesn't mean I think pink peppercorn is like great for desserts. It just happened to be for that particular dessert. As for like on the tier list of spices, Gosh, it'd be fun to do a tier maker with spices, but I wouldn't put it S tier or A tier. To me, it seems like, and I'd probably have to go through it all, and I'm not going to do that for this podcast. It seems like a B tier, and I mean that kind of as a compliment. I think B is above average, right? And then you go C, D, and then F, right? I certainly don't think it's C, D, or F. I think it's B, but it would be tough for me to put it A or S.
Next question is going to be from Kenneth Allen, who asks, for James's linear Super Bowl identity criterion corner. Now, it's important to note here
It's a great way to end that, by the way.
Yes.
The criterion corner, that's perfect.
So, just so people know, the Daily Norseman has decided to follow the linear Super Bowl trophy from the Vikings winning in Week 1 against the Packers, and follow it. Yep, our Super Bowl, to follow the trophy throughout the rest of the year. And as we saw immediately afterwards, the Vikings lost to the Eagles, so the Eagles had that trophy, and then lost it to the Washington Commanders. Now, this last week, the Washington Commanders and the Giants faced off, and they had a tie. So we needed to determine whether or not the Eagles, or not, whether or not the Washington Commanders were able to continue with the belt or the title. What were we going to do? So the championship committee met, i.e., myself, and made the announcement that this team was easily a time limit draw. And as it turns out, the Washington Commanders have their bye week immediately afterwards, and then their first game back is at home against the Giants again. So they had to have a rematch, and the NFL decided to move the rematch into primetime. Fantastic. Now all of us can watch what happens with the linear Super Bowl trophy. So, all of that to tell you this. James wants to argue that the linear Super Bowl will be on hiatus for a week, and then there will be a rematch the week after to determine the winner. Why not instead appeal to philosophical theories of identity over time, including fission cases? A fission case is a case where one individual later becomes two. Example, when Riker gets in a transporter accident in The Next Generation and becomes
Lord.
two Rikers.
Oh my God.
Why not instead say there are now two linear Super Bowls? This would mean more chaos and even more Super Bowl wins for teams other than Green Bay.
All right, so I'm sure James has his own answer, but first of all, insane nerd, incredible nerd.
Incredible deep dive.
Peak amounts of nerd there. Also, I do think I remember that episode of The Next Generation, and I forced James to text our resident Next Generation expert to see if I remember the details of that episode correctly. Has Dusty texted back? By
Dusty has not.
Oh, wow. So he actually is working. That's incredible.
Yeah, I was shocked too.
But, okay. So I think that it doesn't fit the spirit of the linear Super Bowl, which is to kind of mock the idea or to take the idea and run with it, right? That Packers fans have basically a reverse cope, right? Like the idea that, well, I mean, you Vikings fans are proud of this because it's their Super Bowl and they don't have one. We have real Super Bowls. And it's like, man, you care a lot about this. You care a lot about this. Enough that you've invented a reason that the Vikings fans care about a rivalry game. And just take it with it, run with it. And I feel like being able to reward a double win and a tie seems like it violates the spirit of intense mockery over winning against a rival. I think that you should have to win in order to get it instead of split it off. I do like the general theory of moving in chaotic directions. That's very funny to me. It also at some point would require a fairly well-tuned computer and program to track after a while as it keeps splitting. But, you know, I get where this is going, but I think it doesn't fit the spirit of I don't know if well-meaning, mean-spirited. There it is. The opposite of actually well-meaning. Mean-spirited mockery that this follows.
So just looking at this, the reason why this doesn't work for me, and I realize listen, I'm the man in charge of the Hell League. I enjoy chaos more than most. However, the idea that this is going to create more Super Bowl wins for other teams, look, the Packers have already lost 8 games this year. They could lose more. Like, there's already a lot of Super Bowl trophies floating around out there. I don't necessarily think that we need to be adding more to this. So, instead, we are going to move on to Andrew, who asks, regression is God and we've killed him. What ancient deity will be tasked with the duty of exacting revenge on our Minnesota Vikings, and what form will this revenant take?
Oh my God. Okay, so James didn't actually allow me to read any of these questions after the linear Super Bowl one. No, actually, no. Okay, I can actually read that question. I just skipped over it, which is more my fault than James, unless he most recently moved in which case it's his fault. Regression is God and we've killed him. What ancient deity will be tasked with the duty of exacting? Gosh. Okay. Okay. So last week I answered a question with Baphomet, right?
Yes.
What do you remember what the question was?
Really? I am in no way in charge of the continuity of this podcast. I sometimes I leave in 3 minutes of you Googling.
By the way, do we get feedback from the listeners on whether or not they enjoy that kind of content?
I didn't. No one has said yes or no, but I'm not doing it intentionally. That's for damn sure.
Okay, so an ancient deity tasked with the duty of exacting revenge on the Minnesota Vikings. It's got to be like a trickster god of some sort, right? Like one that plays elaborate pranks, because I think the only way that you can exact revenge on the Minnesota Vikings is to play into the absurdity that follows the team wherever they go. It is to take their most precious asset, which is the silliness of the franchise, and turn it on its head to hurt its fans. So it's got to be a trickster god.
Well, here's what you said last time. The question was from Beef Brewski. In a prior Q&A, I asked Arif to comment on Kirk's potential use of demonic forces to aid in the team's success. I misattributed the view that the faithful Christians could use demonic forces to Byzantine monk Salos. This was inaccurate, despite Salos' affinity for theurgy. This view more accurately ascribed to the author of the Testament of Solomon, which Ed Simon identifies as an influence for Salos' work. With that in mind, which demonic entity has Kirk harnessed to aid the Vikings?
Oh, okay. So actually, Baphomet would have been an appropriate answer here too, because the attempting to harness a demonic entity and having that backfire later seems also within the realm of the Vikings. But I'm going to stick with my trickster god answer.
Jeez, that's unfortunate. I think I might have missed a Kenneth Allen one, which I'm just going to toss in here. For Arif and James's final Witchcraft Corner, if the team starts losing and doing poorly after you cancel the Witchcraft Corner, will you accept responsibility for those losses and poor play?
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
The whole point of this season is to talk about regression and sustainability. We are not going to take responsibility for a loss if it turns out we're right. The exact opposite's going to happen.
Yeah, we're just going to double down and I was going to say start burning witches, but I feel like that's too aggressive. just a tad. Arif's Neglected Resistance Bands asks, can the linear Super Bowl be fractioned instead of suspended going forward when ties occur? I'm looking forward, to decades down the road when the pieces fracture and reform in various configurations, so it would be possible to be playing for 5/16 of a Super Bowl in Week 5. We're going to break with tradition and answer this one.
Yeah.
No.
This is way better than Kenneth Allen's. What? No,
there's no way that we could do this.
That's so much better than Kenneth Allen's. That's so funny.
Who is going to put are we going to have Chris?
You.
No.
You.
I'm stretched thin as it is. I'm having trouble managing all the Norse code leagues amongst all my other random duties as assigned. I need 30 hours in a day to accomplish all the things that I am putting off.
Well, I mean, if somebody wants to keep track of fractional Super Bowls, please, by all means, do so.
Damien, I'm looking in your direction since you did stats for the Hell League last year.
Oh my God, I totally forgot. There was like a PDF and everything. Yeah, I would love for this to happen because for somebody years down the road to be able to win 5/16 of the Super Bowl in week 5, that is so funny. How could you not want this?
Because I know the amount of paperwork that would be involved in doing it, and I have no desire to go down that path.
Wow, killjoy.
Yeah, well, I don't have the same love of Excel spreadsheets that you do.
Why not?
I'd say I have better things to do with my time, but we both know that's a lie.
Absolutely do not.
That's okay. Brian Jellerson asks, since we're done with witches, may I offer the next thought experiment? Vikings fans are in a simulation testing the theory of possible ratio of hope and heartbreak that produces a perpetual hell of sustained self-torment. Zimmer was the alpha test. Kevin O'Connell is clearly the beta test. The resulting ratio establishes the ingredients needed for self-sustaining energy to fuel our machine overlords. Too much heartbreak and the host rejects the simulation. Too much hope and happiness and the host becomes complacent, producing diminishing returns. To further attempt to explain possible holes in this theory, I surmise that the world did indeed end in 2012, meaning that all prior seasons actually happened. As the machines reached sentience, they noted a remarkable spike in energy from 98 to 2010, and we're all batteries. This is The Matrix. I just described the plot of The Matrix. I stand by it.
Spoilers for The Matrix. In a way. A 20-year-old movie at this point, right? So you were retroactively warned. I hope you didn't listen if you wanted to be surprised about the core plot point of The Matrix. So I kind of like this one, this theory, because like it kind of matches what I was talking about earlier with attempting to find ways to get fans to continue to buy into the Vikings against all logic. There's still a balance here, right? Because the Vikings are indeed forcing you to kind of confront whether or not the way that you understand the world is correct. I mean, the Vikings are gaslighting you. That's it. They're gaslighting you. And you know it. And it is really difficult for you to maintain a sense of reality. But you still want to buy in. You still want to buy in. You just don't know if you can. And so there's this sense of unease and hope. It's not too much hope, right? The Vikings are not blowing people out, 40-3, right? In fact, the opposite, I guess. They're not blowing people out 40-3 every single game. They're finding ways to make you question the ways that they win and wonder about how they can keep doing this to the point where you just kind of against your better judgment buy in. And that creates, in particular, the regret of believing, right? All the signs were there. They pull out the rug from underneath you. And you have, in addition to the Vikings punching you in the gut, you have the fact that you're blaming yourself. So I think that particular energy matches what you're describing, where there's not too much cynicism, there's not too much hope. It is just the perfect amount of guarded optimism. So I do like this theory, even though I hate simulation theories.
From Nolan Kaler.
Oh, no.
For North Code. Help. I tried the Canadian Grill Arif recommended with the maple and timber, and much like Logan's child, now I have a mouthful of splinters, and I'm having an existential crisis as to whether or not I'm a beaver.
Okay, first of all Canadians have an existential crisis about whether or not they're beavers. That's part of being Canadian. Second, I didn't recommend the grill. I was dissing the grill. I was saying you can't trust Canadian grills because that's what they're made of. I did the opposite of recommending it. If anything, I recommended that you travel to the land of freedom and on-demand healthcare, a thing the United States is known for. Skip the wait times in Canada, get your surgery here, get grills.
I can't wait to see that on Norse Code out of context tomorrow. Be amazing. Also, for a Reef Saskatchewan sub-corner, with a Reef's clear affinity for corners demonstrated by this podcast and his attempts to be one, how can he hate a province with 4 clearly defined ones?
Well, I'm not the biggest fan of Utah, and that has like 6 corners, right?
Yeah, I suppose so.
Yeah. So the number of corners does not determine my affinity for them. In fact, I dislike most of the corners on this podcast.
This is more like you're doing it because of your hatred of the corners.
Yeah, again, sustained by etc.
Yeah. Long-time listeners know. Don asks...
Since at least the 452nd episode.
Yes. Don asks, more likely to happen, Vikings making another Super Bowl or the U.S. team making the Final Four in a World Cup?
Oh, Super Bowl. That's not even close. Have you seen this team? Yeah. Good Lord. I used to be super into soccer. I'm no longer into soccer. I didn't even catch their game against the Netherlands. Someone described it to me, and it was everything that I would have thought. I mean, they abandoned the back line. They were able to create opportunities for crosses, but were never able to actually pass the ball. They have a great playmaker, but no one to pass the ball to. They have no capacity for sensing when crosses might come defensively. I mean, I've seen that is the same soccer team that has been playing since at least 1992. That, like you just described, like the Danny McBride U.S. men's national soccer team. And I loved that soccer team. Like this team is just not going to do it. It's not happening. I'm sorry. It's fun to take a look at the one player that's like kind of good that can play in the Premier League and think, yeah, I think they could do it. But you're playing against like a team composed of entirely those players. Yeah, man. I don't know. The Vikings are more likely to make another Super Bowl. Now, if it was win, then we'd have some interesting conversations. But absolutely they'll make one.
Things would take an interesting turn at that point. Dusty has a question. This is rare. What is the best song by a bad band?
Okay, yeah, so James did give me a heads up that this question was coming down the pipe. Really difficult for me to come up with an answer. I ended up Googling it. I hated almost every response that was given to me by these blogs, which are not music blogs, they're more like pop culture clickbaits, but sure. And I only found one answer among like the 4 or 5 blogs I looked at, which essentially 50 different answers because they could not agree on what was a bad band, or if they did agree on what was a bad band, what was the good song by them. At which point, like they probably need to recognize that they actually like some of the band's work. So for example, like Coldplay is a really good example. Everything Viva La Vida and After kind of sucks. Everything before that, not so bad. Clock, Scientist, Yellow, pretty good. But like people remember the band as it like currently is constituted and not the band as they were, which is why they hate the Black Eyed Peas, but they find the one Black Eyed Peas song they really like. But it turns out the Black Eyed Peas were actually pretty good before they blew up. And so there's a bunch of good songs. So it was just weird to go through this. James then stipulated that it cannot include any one-hit wonders, which is fair, but makes this extremely difficult. So violating that, I wanted to pick a really funny answer, which is Smooth Criminal by Alien Ant Farm. They did not write the song. It's not their song. It's a cover, and it absolutely slaps. It's so good. It's incredible. I hope you've heard it. If you haven't, what are you listening to this for? Listen to that. It rules. Also, I have tried to listen to Alien Ant Farm's other stuff. It's not offensive. It's just there's no character to it. It's just not that good. But I guess they're a one-hit wonder, so I can't choose it. I think Finger 11 qualifies. I think they did a song called One Thing, if I remember correctly.
I mean, technically, they had a couple of hits because they had One Thing. They had I forget if they did Paralyzer, but Finger 11 did a couple of songs.
Yeah, no, exactly, right? So which is why after you stipulated that, I picked them. One Thing I think is their only good song. Notably, they are Canadian. Do with that what you will. So I picked them. This also made me think of Sublime. I actually like all of Sublime's hits, but if you ever try to dig past it, I hate all of their stuff that's not hits. I hate it. It's so bad. But the stuff that are hits, really good. And then on the fifth list that I looked at, which turned out to be a really old Crack.com article, so you knew you could count on it. Bon Jovi's Living on a Prayer. What a great answer. Incredible answer. I love it.
You know, I actually remember seeing that on one of those lists because after I read, Dusty originally put this on the Discord, and I thought about it, and I was Googling, I was like, somebody had to have come up with an actual list for this. And the Bon Jovi one stuck out. It's like, wow, that almost works.
Almost.
But it's not right. Because I know what is the best song ever done by a terrible band. And it's Party Rock Anthem by LMFAO.
You think that song's good?
Yes. I begrudgingly enjoy that song. I think everything else they've ever done is absolutely awful. But I can't... Listen, this song unites people. It unites... It was revealed at one point that Dictators had downloaded this song off of iTunes.
Wow.
So you've got party kids, you've got 39-year-old men, you've got dictators. What more evidence do you need that a song is good?
Oh, geez, that reminds me. Okay, so there is holy crap. I cannot remember the name of the band. A couple years ago they were super popular. They had like 3 or 4 hits. They taught themselves how to play music, and it's mostly just bad, but there's one song I can't get out of my head that I kind of think is pretty good. I remember reading through the YouTube comments of this. It's like a bunch of teenagers that are really upset that their favorite band is not critically acclaimed, which honestly, go for it, man. Fair enough, right? But the arguments were really weird because they're teenagers. So it was stuff like, yeah, like food critics. I don't understand food critics. Everybody just has a different taste for food. And it's like, okay, I get where you're coming from. And that's like very like logical, but like there's a whole thing with food critics that it does make sense. And there's like a through line, and you can learn a lot from reading food critics and eating the food that they eat and understand. It's the same thing with music critics. There's a lot that you can go through, but like at the end of the day, the critics were right. This band is bad. And now I am trying to think of the band. They produce all of their music basically on an iPad. It's like 3 brothers. One of them always wears that stupid bomber hat. I know somebody has figured out who I'm talking about right by now. And I cannot, let's see, band 3 brothers, stupid hat.
Really?
Let's see. No, we're doing this. Wow. Okay. Band 3 brothers, stupid hat did not reveal the band I'm looking at. Revealing the pain under the Bros Boys stupid hats. That's crazy. Okay. Bomber hat? Most people don't call them bomber hats, so it's like a very North Dakota, Minnesota thing. AJR. Holy crap. That's the band. All of their stuff is awful, except... Okay. Was it I'm Ready? Is it that? I don't know, man. One of these is not bad.
If I can paraphrase John Oliver for just a moment, I would just like to point out that LMFAO's first album in 2009 is called Party Rock, and in 2011 they proceeded to apologize for it with the album titled "Sorry for Party Rocking." So,
okay, I respect that.
There is an absolutely brilliant... I used to listen to The Bugle all the time, which is a great podcast that John Oliver had years before he even had a chance at doing anything involving HBO. Like, he had this great podcast where they did when LMFAO broke up, they proceeded to do a great eulogy for them. And John Oliver proceeds to do a reading of Sexy and I Know It.
Amazing. Also, figured out the name of the
brilliant.
song, 100 Bad Days. I can't even claim that it's a good song. I just, I like listening to it. And I don't like listening to any of this other stuff.
Yeah. Logan asks, in 2016, Mike Zimmer attempted some sort of magic or sacrifice with the Fat Cats Get Slaughtered fiasco. What type of magic was he attempting? Why did it fail? And how does his magic differ from Kevin O'Connell's?
Okay, so we have a moratorium after, I guess, right?
Yes.
Okay. You're very emphatic. Yes, answer this.
I'm not answering another damn magic question until maybe the end of the season. So we're done. We're done
right.
After this episode.
Mike Zimmer was not a magician. He does not subscribe to new theories of football. It's all old school, no analytics, no magic, all effort, right? It's just that. So when he was told, I don't know, by his daughter, that there is the possibility of using magic to help win a football game, I mean, he is really committed to winning, right? Like a lot of people were surprised when he implored his team to get vaccinated, but he knows that was an advantage to winning. That's the thing he cares about, right? And so he hears a rumor that you might be able to use magic, and he barrels through the performance of magic because he thinks he knows he heard about it once, and he thinks he knows it's going to work, and he didn't take the necessary steps or do the necessary research to get it fully fleshed out. That's the difference. Kevin O'Connell, Warlock, Mike Zimmer, football coach. That's the difference.
Wow. I didn't realize it was going to be so cut and dry. I remember the discussion on the show of the slaughtered stuffed animals and just how dumb a situation that was.
And then he denied it like it never happened. Like what? Come on, man.
Like this is not the 90s. This sort of thing is going to leak out. I'm sorry. You're just lucky that nobody filmed it.
Yeah.
Kirk's dentist asks, why did James say the witch, warlock, sorcery, magic questions had to end the very week that someone suggested that he is a witch?
Well, James?
Oddly enough, I suggested it immediately before I read that question out loud, so.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And you did not know that question was going to be there despite you curating the questions before every show.
Oh, no, I knew it was there. It was just in the middle of Beef Brewski's question where you brought up the answer that you'd mentioned earlier. I was like, I can't take this anymore. I'm done.
You can't take it anymore.
I was the last one. I couldn't do it anymore. Bob the Pigeon asks, for Reef's favorite team and subject combined corner, it has been established that Kevin O'Connell's magical powers are not because he is a warlock who has entered into a pact with a powerful patron. However, it does leave open the possibility that others in the NFL might be warlocks. Was Russell Wilson's powers granted by him by the eldritch horror beyond human comprehension known as Pete Carroll? And is his subsequent decline attributable to breaking his pact? Did Geno Smith enter into a pact in Russell's stead? And does this also explain why Mark Sanchez leaving USC to enter the NFL draft early removed any of his quarterbacking magic?
Because Pete Carroll was the coach at USC. Okay. Yeah, so one thing, I did just refer to Kevin O'Connell as a warlock. That's incorrect. We've established in previous episodes he's a male witch. So, I totally slip of the tongue. I'm glad we're ending this corner so I don't have to keep this lore straight. But yeah, okay. So that out of the way, that makes sense that Pete Carroll is what is. I guess in this case, it's not Pete Carroll's the warlock. It's that everyone enters into a deal with Pete Carroll and they become warlocks, I believe is the premise of this question.
Yeah, you don't pay with money here.
Yeah. It's like one of those like 80s fantasy tropes that gets really obnoxious in the 2010s and the 2020s.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You have to pay for this? Not with money. Okay, so yeah, sure. Russell Wilson, Geno Smith, and Mark Sanchez all were coerced into becoming Warlocks, which is how it often happens. That is a good explanation for why Russell Wilson declined. Geno Smith became good. And I guess Mark Sanchez, I never thought he was a great prospect at USC, but let's pretend he was for the purposes of this question.
It seemed like the people involved in the draft broadcast were way more excited about him than anyone else was.
Yeah. Yes. I think that's accurate.
The Gaming Nerd asks, for James and Arif's last acceptance of this occultism corner, at what point in our season does this stop being a running joke and start being legitimately real? If we win the Super Bowl, should there be an investigation into the Vikings higher-ups for witchcraft? Will James sabotage us with cursed items in the playoffs to avoid allegations and future occultism questions?
Okay. Good final question there. That makes sense. I hope James does not do that. I will let him answer that part. As for if the Vikings win the Super Bowl, should there be an investigation of the Vikings higher-ups for witchcraft? Who investigates? And who investigates the investigators? The problem here is the corruption goes straight to the top. I think anybody involved in the investigation will be irreparably compromised. Also, I don't know that I ever said that like witchcraft was bad, right? Is it cheat? I don't think it's cheating. There's no rule that a dog can't play basketball.
We keep referring to that, but it's true.
Yeah, that's not cheating. The only moral problem is if instead of being a male witch, he's a warlock. In which case, you have to figure out what eldritch horror he's made a deal with, what he's given up, kind of what the costs of this eternal sacrifice are. That's fine. That's something you should investigate. But magic itself, you don't got to worry about that.
Tell you what, if the Vikings make the Super Bowl, I will happily stroll around a town in Arizona wearing a Blair Walsh Vikings jersey in order to try to like balance out the curse. So just keep that in mind.
I feel like any Vikings fans that are there will not be interpreting it that way.
Oh,
well, I think they will be upset with you.
Will this turn into like that scene in Die Hard where with Die Hard 3 where he's got the sign out in the middle of Harlem? Is that what this is going to turn into?
Yeah, exactly. Precisely.
Wow, this is... Oof. Let's end with Tim Rizzo, who asks, gentlemen, which exceptionally rare occurrence is most likely to happen first? Chris Pratt is cast in a role that asks him to be anything other than Chris Pratt. Arif swallowing his pride and publicly admitting not only that he's a Seahawks fan, but also a turkey lover. Alex Jones makes a public appearance without sweating through every layer of garment he's wearing. Chris Reed is active for a Minnesota Vikings football game. Or James finds true love. Now, I take exception to that last one.
Wow.
I take exception to that last one. That's
saying
just
that
me.
while James is in a relationship is pretty brutal.
Yeah,
that one's rough.
That's not poor form. Poor form.
Did you ask your girlfriend about this one?
No, she's sleeping. I'm not dealing with this right now.
All right. So I could say the one that implies that I'm a Seahawks fan and a turkey lover, although you capitalized turkey in this one. So like I again, country, fine. Bird, not so much. Meat, even less so. The bird, I can, it's, we're encroaching on, so they retaliate by being kind of dicks in traffic. Okay, that's fine. But I'm not a Seahawks fan. There's no, admitting implies that these are the case and I'm lying, and that's just not what's happening here. So that one can't happen. It logically, the premise doesn't exist, so it logically can't happen. So the other three, because we're not touching the last one, I guess. Chris Pratt, Alex Jones, Chris Reed. Things I did not expect to all see in the same question. Actually, I didn't expect to see Alex Jones in any question, but, fair enough. I think that Chris Reed could be active for a Vikings football game just because I don't trust the Vikings to always stay healthy. So that one I'm going to say is most likely to happen first. But if I were to rank those three, It's that one. Then I think Chris Pratt. Not because that one is exceptionally likely. It isn't. None of these are really. But
Hey,
I have the four. But I just feel like Alex Jones can only make a public appearance that way, whereas Chris Pratt. So when he was cast as Mario, everyone hated the decision. Also, everyone was right. Even just from the trailer, it just sounds like Chris Pratt. But the thing is, I think he was cast. I think he was under the assumption, him and the casting director were both under the assumption that he would not be Chris Pratt. And in an interview, he even said he spent like hours and hours working on his Mario voice. And you can't tell. You cannot tell that this is the case. Sometimes for a voice actor, that's a compliment, right? It's like, oh, it's so effortless. It doesn't feel like it felt so natural. It didn't feel like you had to put any work. Here, it's the opposite. Here, it's just like, oh, that just sounds like you. What was the hours? Where did the hours go? How did you spend them?
it was the voice. It was the voice equivalent of that Sonic trailer with the messed up face.
Yes, exactly. In fact, a lot of people brought that up, even though like it's not like a 1-to-1. But yeah, exactly. But the thing is, they could change the Sonic face, I guess. The triviality of that change, I think, was overstated by fans, but the studio did end up doing it. That does cost a lot of money in render farms that you have to rent out. Like that was actually not as easy as a lot of people made it sound. Good on them. I hear that movie was actually pretty good.
I know my son enjoyed it, but it's the same sort of thing that gets all the butts removed from the movie Cats. So these places do good work apparently.
Yeah, just a yeoman's effort there. But yeah, I think that at some point Chris Pratt will respond to that specific criticism. He's not responded to some other ones, but I think he'll respond to that specific criticism and attempt to be more than Chris Pratt. I don't even think his role in Jurassic Park, like, I think he made it Chris Pratt. Like, I don't think the character as originally written was supposed to be like that, but he can only play the one guy. So
that's kind of all he's got. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's going to be it for this episode of Norse Code, and thankfully, the Occultism Corner. We're done.
Thank God.
No more. Arif, what do you have to plug?
So over at Pro Football Network, I've written a couple of stories. Some of them are a little bit shorter than we're used to, but I've got some bigger ones coming up later in the week. I've got one about, how Taylor Heineke might actually be real. Remember, he's only not a real quarterback when it comes to discussing the Vikings schedule. But for the rest of my discussions about him, he's a real quarterback. And how even in a tie, he kind of proved that he's got enough to really think about, what he can do. I did do a write-up on the Vikings-Jets game. I also did a little bit of a write-up on, who the Detroit Lions are, what they can do, and kind of what their 2023 and 2024 looks like. And a couple of updates here or there about NFL records or Lamar Jackson's knee injury. But those are essentially the articles to check out. And then later on in the week, I've got some bigger picture stuff as well as an update to the quarterback power rankings that I work on every couple of weeks.
Well, that's going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. For Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And please remember that this is not sustainable. And we'll be back later this week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, and wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan of Pro Football Network, and he can be found at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN or my personal account at Big Mono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can do so in a few different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there. For $3.50 a month, you get bonus material and more. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode for a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and pick up some Norse Code merchandise. Any questions or comments that cannot fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this.
All things are possible through the power of Ben DiNucci.